Okay, and before we kick off the panel, I wanted to kind of give a land acknowledgement. So for me, I'm tuning in from San Francisco Bay Area, the traditional territory of Ramaytush Ohlone. I honor the lands and waters they have stewarded here for the time immemorial. While we as a Fashion Revolution USA team are still learning and pushing ourselves to do better to support Indigenous communities, we are continuing our journey here today and encourage you all to learn about the importance of land acknowledgements and what territories you reside on. And below is a few resources that's really great to learn more about the Indigenous territories you reside on, treaties, languages, along with other educational resources. And the link below is also a really great helpful guide to understand the importance of land acknowledgement. All right, so I wanted to give like a quick shout out to the West Coast team and the Fashion Revolution staff members for putting together this amazing panel with amazing speakers. We're really excited to share this with all of you. And here we all are. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to the moderators of today's panel to introduce themselves. And then we will have the panelists introduce themselves as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Zoe. I'm a student at UC Davis. I'm going into my 4th year undergraduate, and I study international relations, Spanish, and public health. And I'm really happy to be here and be given the opportunity to moderate these awesome panelists today. It's really nice to meet everyone.
Hi everyone, I'm Madison. I'm really excited to be here. I'm from Albany. I'm doing a 3-to-1 visiting program. So I'm doing 3 years at Oneonta for fashion merchandising, and then I'm going to FIT for my senior year for advertising, marketing, communications. I love sustainability and I love learning more about it every day. So I'm very excited to hear about all of our amazing speakers and their experiences. And we're going to get started and go straight to Hope. So she's going to give a little introduction.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you. Happy Saturday. My name's Hope. I am the founder of 2 small businesses hailing from Oakland, California. The first business I started I think it's been 6 years now. It's called Fresh to Death Collective. It's a women of color empowerment brand that focuses on social justice accessories, handmade accessories. So I do identify myself as a maker. And then I also coach women on how to start businesses with a speciality in like creative businesses. And then I also co-founded a company while vending for Fresh to Death. I met a whole bunch of other Black women business owners in Oakland, and we founded an organization called Just Be. And we have, since 2016, we have hosted the largest Black women's holiday marketplace in the Bay Area of folks who are majority are making their products by hand. And that is me.
And then we could pass it off to Joelle.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. I'm very happy to be with you all today. Hi, my name is Joelle. I am an independent fashion researcher, the co-founder of Tribute Collective, which is responsible retail based in Washington, DC, and that focuses on ethical design and design as in fashion and homeware and furniture. I'm also the co-founder of the DC Sustainable Fashion Collective, which is a community of people that are interested in ethical fashion based in Washington, DC and the whole metro area. I'm originally from Lebanon, born and raised in West Africa. That's the French accent. And my background is in political science. I have also an MA from Parsons in fashion studies.
Thank you. And next we have Kamilah.
Hey everyone, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here today. So I'm a leadership and marketing consultant plus coach for creative social impact founders in the areas of sustainable fashion, arts, climate justice, and equity. And I am also founder and CEO of Greater Than Equal. That is, our focus is to disrupt the fashion industry supply chain to help to facilitate the creation of a sustainable, ethical model. And locally, I actually work with a lot of nonprofits that are arts focused and maker focused, supplying like exhibition opportunities and mentorship opportunities for local artists.
Thank you. And lastly, we have Monica here.
Hi, everyone. It's lovely to be here with you today. My name is Monica Fajardo, and my background is in textile manufacturing. I worked at a textile mill based in Los Angeles for about 5 years, developing contemporary knits for the activewear, sportswear, and swimwear markets before I transferred to the University of California, Riverside to pursue a degree in material science and engineering, and have recently graduated from that program. And currently, I'm an intern at Fashion for Good, which is a global platform for sustainable fashion innovation. And I'm really interested in sustainable and circular materials and aspire to be a materials engineer that brings these technologies forward and helps them scale.
Awesome, thank you. So we're going to dive into our questions now. So the first question is going to be, can you give an introduction or a quick background of how you got started in the field? So if we want to get started with, we can start with Hope again.
Yeah, so my experience in fashion is actually like pretty non-traditional. So I started out as an entrepreneur, but I didn't mean to be a business owner. So I graduated from UC Santa Cruz in feminist studies and sociology, and I was like really anti-capitalism. And so if you had told me like, you're gonna start a business, like if my future self was like, came to me and was like, guess what, you're about to be a really awesome social entrepreneur, I would have been like, you're crazy. So I was working in youth development in San Francisco, at an organization called MyEP, Youth Workforce Development in Economic Development, and actually Christy was one of my students, so that's exciting. And I needed like a creative outlet, and so I went to an event in New York that some folks may know on this call called Afropunk, which is like a creative Afro, like futurist punk rock alternative festival. And I saw a lot of makers and creatives making things, and at the time I was like a big earring accessory nerd. And so I spent too much money on credit trying to buy accessories from women of color makers. And then I was going through a really rough patch. As part of my work, I'm really honest about mental health. So I do have a seasonal depression, and I've done a lot of healing work and intergenerational trauma. And so at the time I was going through a really tough depression. And when I came back to Oakland, I was like, you know what, like I can make earrings, like I could do this, right? Like I could make these things. So I like bought a whole bunch of materials. And my medium became wood. I chose wood over like plastic and acrylics more for the sustainability side of things. And then of course had to learn like what that means with wood, but I painted and created accessories. And then I went to an event called First Fridays here in Oakland, which at the time was really accessible for artists. And I started selling my pieces, and I made some monies. And then a dear friend of mine had started a business accelerator called Youth Impact Hub, and he was piloting it on adults. And so he was like, yo, like you're doing this thing, you want to make it legit, like do this business training program. And I actually did it while I was working full-time at MyEP. I did this business training program, put together a business plan, and they had a pitch event, and I won the grand prize of $1,000, which wasn't much, but it felt like the universe was like, okay, stick this out, like here's some startup capital to figure this thing out. And so from there, I evolved the business, and really it was able to tap into not just fashion, but also like the technological side of learning. I learned how to like laser cut wood, and my passion for technology was combined. And then my passion for social justice, I ended up designing accessory lines that focused on wearing what you believed on your body. So for example, so I'm wearing, these are some of my pieces right here. So this is Si Se Puede. This is from a Dia de los Muertos line. But these are wood-based earrings, and I started designing and crafting like a brand around like what we wear on our bodies, and you know, realizing that that's what fashion really is anyways. It's about your identity. It's about how you see yourself and your body and in your spirit. So yeah, that's a little bit of how I got started. And then I've always had a passion for teaching and facilitation and community work and organizing. So I evolved into helping other entrepreneurs become start their own creative businesses. Yeah, so I'll pause there.
Wow, that's so inspiring. I love how you used wood and everything for earrings. I didn't even think about doing that. That's awesome. So we'll turn over to Joelle if she wants to give a little introduction about how she got into her field.
Mhm. Like Hope, I was not made at all to to be in fashion. I studied political science and international affairs, and I wanted to be kind of a Lebanese woman, you know, in the diplomatic court of Lebanon, you know, speaking different languages, coming from another, you know, I grew up in West Africa, so I wanted to kind of like disturb a little bit this very manly government in Lebanon, but then I realized that it would not be so easy. So I graduated with a BA in political science, and then I went to work for the UN for a little bit. And then at the same time, I always had a passion for, you know, for clothes and history, fashion history. So a friend of mine told me that Marie Claire was actually opening in the Middle East, in Dubai, and they were looking for writers. So he told me you should apply, and he told me that I had nothing to do with politics. So I was like, okay, I'll give it a chance. And I applied and I got the job. So I became a fashion editor, associate fashion editor at Marie Claire. I worked with them for 4 years until I was a little bit overworked. And then I had absolutely no background again in fashion when I did that. It's just, I loved writing and I loved fashion basically. But then I decided to take a break and I flew to Vietnam for like 2 months. And I completely fell in love with the country, fell in love with the textile of the country. I traveled north. So I came back to Lebanon. I quit my job and moved full-time to Vietnam to work with the ethnic minorities, the Hmong people in the north, working with hemp and natural dyes. That's also where my interest in sustainability happened. So that was in 2010. I stayed there for 4 years. I opened a company there. I worked with designers, doing some consulting work and learning more about the field. And then I decided to go back to school to actually learn a bit more about fashion, but from a critical point of view. So I found this program at Parsons called the Fashion Study, MA in Fashion Studies. And I applied and I got in. And I think that it completely changed the way I also look at fashion today. I was always critical being a writer, but you know, learning more about the sociology and anthropology of fashion, you know, made me want to kind of dive more into it. So I finished my program. I worked at a couple of museums, and then I moved to Washington, D.C., where I had a little mission with the Textile Museum here, working on 2 exhibitions, 2 contemporary exhibitions. My specialty is not at all, it's 20th and 21st century. And then I stayed in DC and I opened Tribute, which is basically exactly what I love. It's mixing retail with, you know, with the culture of fashion. So looking at fashion with an analytical and critical eye, always trying to understand why we're wearing what we're wearing, and looking at, you know, understanding the civilization through fashion for me has always been a passion. So if I can mix that and at the same time bring the designers that I love and that I met along my journey, traveling all over, that are doing amazing work in a very responsible way, you know, I think I would be happy. So I created Tribute. And so now that's what I run, and I always do on the side. I continue to do my research, to publish paper in the academia. So it's kind of bridging business and academia at the same time.
Wow, you like gained a lot of experience and travel. That's so interesting seeing all the different countries and their like values with sustainability. You never really think of it when you're just in the one country your whole entire life. So I'm gonna turn it over to Kamilah and she's gonna talk a little bit also about how she got into her field.
Yeah, so my background is actually a mashup of different industries. Started out when I first started working, really, one of my first jobs was retail fashion apparel, and I did that for a while. And so it's retail fashion apparel, financial services, sustainable tech, nonprofit slash social enterprise. So all of those kind of mash up into what I'm doing today, and I can apply everything that I'm doing to what I'm doing today. But how I got started, if I think about how I got started in fashion, it really goes back to my childhood because my mother, one of her jobs was a seamstress, right? And she was like super obsessed with fashion. And I think as a child, I just kind of picked up on that because we used to watch, runway shows and read Vogue magazine and, everything. And just throughout my life, it's always been like, oh, this is a different fabric. And she used to make our clothes. We used to go thrift shopping and, all those different things. And I've just always kind of lived and breathed fashion my entire life. Like I kind of just kept that love for fashion. And of course, when I started working, that's what I did, right? Is be involved in the industry. And so how I kind of got into marketing, it was a little bit of a pivot because I was doing entry-level marketing, but then also doing fashion. And I got an opportunity to be on the executive level doing marketing. And so I took that opportunity when it presented itself. And so that I have more pivots, but I can hold that for I know we'll talk more about it later. But that was kind of my first start into what I was doing.
Awesome, thank you. It's so interesting to hear about all the different things contributing into your career. You never really think of it with fashion, but there's so many different career paths and things that you can add into job titles. So thank you. Next we have Monica, and she's going to share a little bit too about her background.
Yeah, so hi everyone. So actually I was really interested in working in the apparel industry pretty early on. Straight from high school, I attended the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising, and my first job straight from there was a merchandising job, and I figured out that was not for me. But one of my favorite classes at that school had been textile science. So after that, I got a job at a textile mill, learned about manufacturing of textiles, and I just really like problem solving there, working with brands to develop new materials for each season. And I was really interested in like why materials behave they do, like what happens at the microstructure level that affects the bulk properties of the materials and ultimately how it behaves. So I also saw a need for more innovative materials in textiles because even though at the time we offered like organic cotton, mechanically recycled cotton, hemp, natural fibers, like we still use a lot of synthetic fibers like polyester and nylon. So I knew that, there was going to be some material revolution happening in the industry. And I felt like the best way for me to be part of that was to go back to school, get a more technical degree, really understand the science behind materials and gain the skills needed that I needed to work at a company that was doing that. So that was my journey into the fashion industry.
Thank you. That's so interesting. I took a textile science course, so I understand some of the terms you're using. But yeah, it's like people need to be educated a little more on what they're wearing, what materials are made into their clothing. But thank you all so much for that. So now we're going to jump on to the second question, and that was there a time when you made a decision that pivoted your career or took you into a new direction at all? Sorry. We'll start off with Hope.
Thanks. Pivoted my career, took me in a new direction. I mean, starting a business while working full-time in a nonprofit was a pretty big leap. and I guess it wasn't, and for folks who are thinking about starting their own businesses, it's usually not very linear in my experience, especially with folks who traditionally don't have access to startup capital or business development resources. So I took many a full-time jobs, and it wasn't until I think it was 2015 when I had taken this really high-profile job in tech education when it was like really hot in Oakland. And I was running around the country doing all this national work, and I was burnt out and exhausted. And I had applied to graduate school to be a high school teacher, what I thought was going to be a high school teacher, and teach social justice education. But at the time, it didn't really make sense financially. I'm sure y'all know teachers are highly underpaid, and to get an education in teaching, it's really expensive in grad school. So, and I really just spiritually wanted to start my own bit, like to focus on my business, but I was scared. I was like deep in scarcity, like mode, like how could I do this? I don't have any money. Like I grew up low income. Like what's gonna happen? And so I actually went to orientation for that program and had a panic attack, and then came to Oakland in my parking lot, called a mentor of mine and was like, I don't want to do this. Like, I don't want to do it. And she was like, you know what? Like, it's okay. Like, trust your spirit. Like, don't force yourself to do something like you really don't want to do. Like, it's okay. It's like not the end of the world. And so I told like 2 graduate programs no, and I committed to taking another business class. And then I doubled down on just really trying to understand how to run Fresh to Death. And then later on, I was able to co-found another business. I will say that running a business is like grad school. So I think you have to think of it that way, because there were many moments where I achieved some pretty amazing goals of like doubling my revenue and getting help, building team. But then I had another hurdle, you know, around like finances and consistent income, learning how to run my books and things like that, dealing with my money trauma, you know, and scarcity stuff. So it 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 has been quite a journey. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I bet. I'm glad you trusted your gut feeling though and knew you didn't want to go straight into teaching. So at least you're in a happier state of mind now with what you're doing. So we're gonna jump over to Joelle, and she's gonna explain anything that she had any pivots or something else.
Oh, a lot of pivots. And I'm grateful for all of them, to be honest with you. I think if you, I mean, I'm not the kind of person that does things like this. But yeah, the first one was literally moving from politics to fashion, but that was fun. That was kind of nice. I had guidance, and I was very curious. So that was a good, way to look at it. But then, working in the industry and being really looking at trends, looking at like catwalks, and I think I got really tired after a while, and tired of also the strictness at this industry. I mean, I used to go on those shows and everyone was wearing black, or so, or just I felt like I was not the happiest. I was doing it, but I was still learning. And so that's where, like, when I flew to Vietnam, and basically in Vietnam, a friend of mine who was a textile artist took me out to a secondhand market outside of Hanoi. And I arrived there, and she was like, you have to be ready to take it. And I was like, okay, I don't really understand what you mean. I mean, I'm used to secondhand markets, but with stores and little vendors. This one was like a mountain of clothes, mountain. So you get there, you take your shoes off, and you start climbing this mountain of clothes. And then you realize that, you have American brands, English brands, like it's all secondhand. And actually I was very touched and very shocked by the amount of waste that I was confronted to. The woman was asking me like, do you want a bag? And I was like, why are you asking? Like, how would I buy the clothes? And it's like, oh, we sell by the pound. They give you this big trash bag and you put stuff inside. You don't even see what you're putting. So I went back home, and then I started to do some research, and I was like, okay, I cannot go back to work for an industry that is so harmful, for the people, but also for the planet. So that was a huge pivot where really I quit the job with Michael, and I was like, I cannot really, if I want to be honest with myself, I cannot continue to contribute to an industry that actually is not doing anything good. So that was a huge one. Trying to understand better the impact of fashion on the planet and on its people. And then really like Hope, opening your own business. I mean, me as a foreigner, trying to understand the laws and regulation and what I'm allowed to do in the US, how, also with dealing with the visa issues, how am I supposed to open a company? Can I be 100%, owner of the company as a foreigner? Do I have to share? So trying to navigate all of those things in a city like DC. I was lucky to have some support from friends and other entrepreneurs, so I still like look at it as, it's a passion, because I really love what I'm bringing and what I'm putting on the table in the city that is very focused on politics and power. And I'm trying to kind of, use fashion not only as a way to, just consume and discard, but also make them understand the importance of wearing what they're wearing, of buying this fabric instead of buying this fabric. So yeah, that was a huge challenge for me, and I still struggle. I try to understand the financial of it. I think for me it's kind of the most complicated. And mind you, I come from a family of entrepreneurs, so my dad is, makes fun of me sometimes when I do ask him for advices, but again, working in the US as a foreigner can be a bit tricky, but you work through it. And I think as long as you're passionate, you want to get there, and then you see the product and you see that people are actually appreciative, and so you continue to do the work, and I'm still there. So I expect maybe one more pivot at some point, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, life has us pivot all the time. That's really eye-opening when you saw the pile. Like, you see it in textbooks and photos of it, but in person, that's probably very emotional. I always try to buy secondhand. I know that's what everyone's trying to do now. Thrifting is really big. So hopefully fast fashion will slowly stop piling up. But yeah, clothing never really goes away. They just create a little pile and you don't see it, so you're like, oh, it's gone, but it's really not gone. So thank you for that. We're going to turn it over to Kamilah now. Do you have any pivots in your career path at all?
I'm like Joelle. I'm like, which one? But yeah, I can totally relate to Hope and Joelle. So one of my major pivots, I should say, was when I left corporate, and I was working for an international Fortune 500 company. Like it was a corporation. It was great, but I was like, oh, there's still more that I want to do. And it's funny because I have a similar example as Hope, because I was going to go back to grad school again. And I was sitting in the orientation. I was like, I do not want, like, I love school. I love learning. I would go to school every day if I could. But in that moment, I was like, I do not want to be here. So I really had to go back and examine why I didn't want to be there. And the reason was because, I didn't want to keep moving up in this corporate, atmosphere. And it's funny because you have two different people and they have the same job, and one person's like, yes, this job is great, I'm making an impact on the world, and the other person's like, I need to do something else, or I need to do more. And so I chose to leave corporate, and I got into social enterprises, nonprofits, right, which was amazing. And I started to lean into more of the things that I knew that I really liked to do based on my past experiences, which was like events and connecting with people. And I love being surrounded by social impact founders and people that want to make an impact on the world. So that was great. But I was working for a small nonprofit, and I realized that what I wanted to do was bigger than one organization. And as I was talking to different founders, they're like, people are super passionate about what they want to do and the impact that they want to make. but they don't necessarily have the funds or the resources to hire somebody that has like tons of experience and to come in there and like, you know, help them to do things. And so the people that I was talking to, I was kind of started advising them and things like that. And I was like, you know what? I could affect so many different organizations if I, you know, had my own consulting uh, business. So that was my other huge pivot, was into entrepreneurship, which was a really good one, because at that point it's like, hey, actually the sky is the limit, right? I can do whatever I want. And so that's when I chose to focus on like arts and makers and sustainable fashion. And I can, when Joelle was talking, it's like, I can remember when I wanted to start a fashion boutique, but I was like, I can't picture selling clothes that for hundreds of dollars and there's people over here starving. Like, there's got to be something better. And I explored sustainable fashion a long time ago, but I thought it was just about like, you know, buying cotton or buying organic. And then when I really started to get into it, I was like, whoa, like this is about the climate. This is about social justice. It's about all these different things. And I'm like, this is me, like, you know, wrapped up into, you know, a bow. This is something that I definitely want to be involved in the more that I kind of dug into the research. So that's why, you know, that's why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. But it took that pivot in kind of the freedom of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, you always have to trust your gut, and whatever makes you happy, you need to do. That was really inspiring too. You all have such inspiring backgrounds. So Monica, if you want to go next, any pivots with your career path at all?
Yeah, I think similar to Hope and Kamilah, going back to school was probably my biggest pivot for engineering. Yeah, I mean, it was a scary thing. As a non-traditional and also first generation student, like I went to community college first, did my prerequisites. So I would work in the textile mill during the day. In the evening, I would take my classes, and basically in the weekend, I would do all my homework and assignments. So it was also like a stressful time because I was juggling a lot of things, a lot of tasks at work, a lot of homework and schedules. And I did that for about 3 years till I was able to transfer to UCR. And at the same time, like going through your classes, like you notice that as you start progressing and taking like the physics and like the higher level courses, like you start seeing less women in engineering, and especially like less women that look like you. So like kind of navigating that and working through that. And once I transferred to UCR, it was great because I was like surrounded with people with like-minded individuals, and we all had an interest in materials and wanted to learn and teach each other about things. And it was worth it. I mean, my friends and family had a lot of support, so I can say it was worth it, and it was a great experience to go through that.
Yeah, thank you. I like how you mentioned gender a little bit too with that, because I know that's a lot with engineering. They always say it's more male concentrated, but it's nice to see females finally pushing through and going to it. Thank you for that. So I'm going to go on to the next question for all of you, and that's going to be, what does sustainability mean to you, and how do you implement these values in your work? So we can start off with Hope again.
Yeah, thanks for this question. The first thing that came to mind for me around sustainability wasn't just like materials and things. It was actually around how you build team, and how you treat your employees. So I had shared previously that I had worked in youth workforce development with Christy, and then before that, I had been part of a program called Public Allies AmeriCorps, where it was essentially adult workforce development for folks who wanted to get into the nonprofit sector. They trained folks to be their tagline is like diverse leadership, and Public Allies had a little bit of fame because Michelle Obama started the Public Allies chapter in Chicago. So the interesting thing about workforce development, if folks aren't familiar, is that it is a model where either the county or the city or a nonprofit pays for the wages of folks to get professional experience with a small business or an organization or a nonprofit. And so what that means for a small business owner like me is that I actually don't have to pay the wages. It's already covered in the organizational model. So working inside the nonprofit, I didn't realize that as a business owner that I was still in the same industry, essentially in economic development, but on the other side. And so I had a really powerful full circle moment where I partnered with a different nonprofit out here in the Bay called New Door Ventures. And I was able to actually hire folks. My first intern, I think she's like 22. Actually, she's considered a fellow. And she was going to community college in San Francisco, a really powerful young Black woman and she actually ended up going to UC Davis. She might still be there, Zoe, actually. And she was able to work with me in my small business. I taught her how to create product. We talked through all kinds of things really just to help her on her professional journey. But it was deep because I guess I hadn't realized, like, the light bulb went off that, like, oh, like, I'm not just out here making product, being creative, that sort of thing. I'm actually, like, the way I structure my organization can have an impact in how I build team and culture. And we know that, like, in the fashion industry, there's a lot of exploitation of labor, right? It's in traditional capitalism, it relies on low wage labor, right? Fast fashion is probably one of the guiltiest ones of that. So it's pretty deep. And so that also led me on a sustainability journey that wasn't just about, like, who do I partner with, right? What organizations do I partner with to bring on my team and to support the community and young folks, but also, like, do I want to look at cooperative models, right? Horizontal leadership models where I'm not structuring things in a hierarchy. And I've had a really powerful, blessed experience of being able to work in 2 organizations where we are actually doing that as leaders. So one pivot I didn't tell you guys is that I do have a full-time job now that I accepted during COVID, but they were a client and I still run my businesses, which is crazy. But I'm the operations director for an organization called Runway. So we move capital to small businesses, Black and brown businesses across the nation. And so I'm still in the same industry in a different way. And we operate like a worker self-directed nonprofit. So what that means is we are practicing participatory democracy where we have circles and we decide together, and it's not just the executive director that decides things. It's not just the executive team, these titles that we create, right? And so it's actually a very empowering and honestly more sustainable model for the long term anyways, because what we found in organizations, which many folks have probably experienced burnout here, and also in organizing and activism, is that if we're relying on one person to run everything and that one person gets sick or they dip or something happens, then the rest of the organization or movement can fall apart. And so we want to move towards a leaderful model where we have multiple people that are confident and empowered to take on and run the thing, because that's building things for the long term, for generations to come, right? That's deepening into some old ancestral knowledge, right, around bringing in the indigenous piece and our ancestors piece of, like, we need to be thinking like 5-10 years out, right? Or an entire generation 18 of a child's life. So that requires us to think really deeply about how we're structuring things in a way that we haven't, because fast fashion and capitalism is like grow at all costs, like dig in the ground at all costs, make as much money as all costs. We do know some billionaires flew to space this week. That's crazy stuff. Like that's exponential growth. That's not sustainability. So so that's what I'll share about that I've learned on my journey that's been really powerful. And I shared some links with Christy. If folks are interested in learning more about how to structure things around cooperatives, there's an organization called Selk out here in Oakland that trains people on how to do it. And it's an organization of lawyers. So they help people create the infrastructure to really run your company that way. It's Sustainable Economies Law Center. And then there's another term I'll drop called the solidarity economy, if folks are familiar with that work. But that's also kind of what I'm pulling from, which is this concept that we center people and the planet over profits, and that we really can create a world where everyone is thriving. Like, that is possible.
That's so refreshing to hear. I know so many fast fashion businesses are just about making money all the time. They don't really care what they do in the process to make money. So it's nice hearing about the democracy and that interns and assistants can even give their ideas and stuff, because they do usually have a lot of great ideas, especially being from a younger audience standpoint. It's nice that they can add in their own point of view and stuff, and you guys can work together. I loved hearing that. So Joelle, did you want to share too?
Yeah, and I wish there were more organizations like the one you're talking about, Hope, that help actually small business to start, because when I first started Tribute, obviously having studied and worked in sustainability for so long, I was like, there's no way. I mean, I have to start with that, with that good base. And how do I start that when at the end of the day, I need to buy product that I have to sell, basically to make money, to buy more product that I have to sell to make more money. So it's kind of, it was a bit, how to put together, how to be responsible as a retail. I usually use the word responsible more than sustainable, because it's always very difficult to define sustainability for me. But if I have to talk about it, I would do it in two ways. Like from a business point of view, it's really started from scratch. That's how we started the business, like looking at obviously the product that I have. So I have a very thorough way to work with the designers I work with. So we have a list of questions. We have 12 questions. The list is growing. So it starts with the aesthetic, obviously, and we have a very specific aesthetic, and then really transparency working with those designers. So I ask really question about their supply chain, and I want to know who is the supplier, because I want to research the supplier. I want to be able to kind of take a look at their factories. I want to be able to look at the atelier if they work in an atelier. And pre-COVID, I did that. I worked with a couple of companies in LA and in New York and in Mexico, and I went in and I spoke with the employers and the staff, asking them about the condition they're working. So if a company doesn't accept to do that, and it happened, I'm not going to work with them, basically, because I am also accountable to my clients, to my customer. If they ask me a question, I want to be able to answer, and I want to be able to answer in the most honest and transparent way. So for us at Tribute, this is kind of like the main thing. We don't work with companies that are, and we made the mistake to work with one Canadian company specialized in vegan leather. And like 2-3 years ago, everyone was talking about this polyurethane as being like the next vegan leather. And once you learn more about it, and you learn about the how it cannot be recycled, basically, I stopped working with them. I asked them a couple of questions about the suppliers. I said they cannot share. So we fully stopped. And today we're focusing more on vegetable leather, cactus leather, for example, made in Mexico. So it's, I'm learning a lot. That's why I wish there was more guidance for small companies like us, more guidance also onto reporting, because I'm trying to do some reporting. But, I'm a small company. So how am I supposed to report if, again, the guidance is not there. So if there's something that, if someone wants to create that, I'll be happy to work with that person. So that's from one side. On the business point of view, our board is also, the staff and the founders are very close. We're a very diverse group, but I think you have a question on diversity, and I can touch on that later. And on the other side, it's about creating a community. So, we want to teach people about fashion, about the culture of fashion, and about the history of fashion, because I do believe that once you understand the history of it, you better understand the connection to the clothes. You can actually better connect if there is some storytelling behind that. So we really create a community-oriented project, like film screening on whether it's the making of a shirt, or it's a history of a specific item, a specific bag, 1962 bag. And what we notice is that once people connect and once people learn, they can appreciate more, and they're more aware of that, the importance of, not only being able to express that identity, but being able to tell the story of a piece of garment. So yeah, it has different layers, and I look at it from a holistic experience.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's really awesome how hands-on you are with going to different vendors and companies and checking out all of the stuff that they have to make sure it's sustainable. It's important to have those values for your company. So thank you for doing that. It's really inspirational. So we're going to turn it over to Kamilah, and she's going to talk about sustainability and how she implements it too.
Yeah, so to me, I would say sustainability is about values. And it's something that is ingrained in you. It's something that you do every day with every decision that you make. And it's not like a temporary thing because it's a value, right? And for me also, I know that a lot of people define sustainability in different ways, and they kind of split it with ethics. But I think it's the same thing. I don't think that you can have sustainability, whatever definition you have, without that ethical part of it. Like, because I think it's about your relationship to each other, to people, to the planet. And so you have to have, they go hand in hand, right? And you have to think about what happens, just like Joelle was talking about, you have to think about what happens along the supply chain and what are garment makers getting paid, or are you culturally appropriating and things like that. So I think you have to think about all of those things. The way that I use it or implement it is really trying to provide tools and resources to people like Joelle, or even like Hope, or anyone that would want to be able to be more sustainable, and providing those tools and resources and the connections that we can start to create a community of people that are talking about similar things and sharing ideals and sharing what they need. And whether that tool is perhaps financial, or whether that tool is just being able to reach out to somebody, or a designer being able to apprentice with another designer, or things like that. So I'm really the type of person that I am. I'm really a connector. So I kind of facilitate all of those things, like, okay, what are the resources? What are the tools that we can bring in? What are the programs that we can create so that we can do all of this together and share knowledge?
Yeah, thank you. There's so many elements that come into play that you don't realize, especially when you're just a student like me, where we think about sustainability. We're like, oh, it's just about having your clothing, not fast fashion, having it made with organic, fresh materials. But you don't realize the ethics when it comes with that, because of the labor and all the money hungry companies. So it's nice to hear about what comes into play and what you guys all believe in for sustainability. So we're going to turn it over to Monica now.
All right, so to me, sustainability means understanding how the materials are made that are making up your garments, and also what happens to them once they end up in the landfill. So like the way in my internship, when we assess new technologies in the raw material space, we look at like basically the whole process of that material. So what's the feedstock? What generation is the feedstock? So is it derived from corn competing with food crops, or is it using algae or like methane gas waste to produce these materials? And like Joel mentioned, it's sometimes difficult because like a company can say they make vegan leather, but it turns out that they're actually using a partially bio-based materials and blending it with polyurethane. And at the end of the day, it still takes hundreds of and thousands of years to just decompose at a landfill. So like assessing all of those different, starting from the feedstock and also like the process, like how much water does this process use? Like what's the energy input? Like are you able to reduce any of the chemistry that goes into processing these materials? And also just as important is the end of use. So what happens when this garment enters like the environment in a landfill or like a marine environment? Is it going to decompose and contribute to the microplastics pollution in the environment, or can it safely decompose into organic material back into the earth? So it's like having all those considerations for material technologies, because just because something is bio-based, it doesn't necessarily mean it's better. And being able to look at all those different aspects of a material is really important.
Yeah, I feel like it'd be important to have everyone educated and think the same way on how everything decomposes and all of that. If everyone thought of that, I believe the world could be very more sustainable in that aspect. Thank you. So I'm going to turn over to the next question, and that is, what are some common misconceptions people have about your work? And we'll start with Hope with that.
Thanks, Madison. I just want to name that, like, I really love, like, what's coming up in this panel, because I feel like the ingredients for building like the most sustainable thing ever. it's like all like, I was like, okay, so like we got like the product side with Monica, and then like sustainable like organizational structure with like cooperative horizontal leadership, and then partnerships with Kamilah, and then Joelle's got like the next level around like fashion and partnerships and manufacturing transparency. I was like, y'all, like everyone should just form whatever this organization is that needs to be put together with all of these things. Someone needs to form this thing, so, and stay in touch with all of us so we can support you. So I just really appreciate that. What are some of the common misconceptions people have about my work? Let's see. Well, I will say, like, in the maker space, in the maker movement, I feel like it blew up and exploded. I want to say, was it like I want to say between like 2016 to like 2018 or 2019. Like, I started to realize, one, that I wasn't just like making things to make things, that I was in fashion. So I actually didn't realize I was like in the fashion industry until I kind of started creating business plans. And then I was in the niche, right, within fashion, like handmade maker. And then I didn't realize that I was also in a movement. Like, there's a movement around it. Like Etsy, who we're probably all familiar with, like built their company around that movement, right? They leveraged that movement. So, and there's like data and research. You can like Google the maker movement and the maker industry. It's like an industry. Now, I mean, I think it comes out of the handmade artist industry, you know, that's always been there. But I think traditionally it was like a lot more high end, and now it's kind of like the DIY thing, right? Like anyone can kind of enter it. There's low barrier to entry. But I will say, like, a couple misconceptions is, and when I first started selling products, for sure, like, and selling earrings, like I had to go on my own journey around product branding and pricing, and understanding like that I'm not selling the same kind of earrings that are like at the Dollar Tree or like the beauty supply store. You know, I used to wear like the big hoop earrings, right? And so I would price my things like that, like, you know, really cheap, and not realizing like the cultural value and the labor value of what I'm providing, and that would then allow me to run a sustainable company and pay my employees well, and that sort of thing. And so that was quite a journey, and having to educate folks up as well, because sometimes you know, I think the biggest thing with makers first starting out is like self-esteem, of like, you already feel vulnerable putting your creativity out there, and then someone's like, oh, like, I'm not gonna pay for it, it's too much money, and then it's like, oh my god, I'm just gonna like close my business down, I quit, like I give up, like they're right, I'm charging too much. And I have, you know, I've coached a lot of folks who are like, no, like, that person isn't your customer, then that's not your ideal person you're trying to support in the world, and they're not your ideal person that's trying to support you, so you just let that person go. They're the beauty supply store human. And that's okay, like there's nothing wrong with that, but don't give up. And so I think, so that's been an interesting journey. And then even like, you know, and I'm sure with sustainable products, like we talk about that, like it's like, oh, it's more expensive, or like, how do I invest in that? And like understanding that as we're entering in this new economy and all this new, you know, like awareness in the world around, like, you vote with your dollars, so you decide where you spend your funds and what you do with them. And that's actually, everyone has that power and that agency in the system that we live in. So that's one misconception that comes up. And I feel like the other misconception I already shared, which is just around like sustainability in fashion isn't just about the products themselves, it's also about like the organizational structure and like how you treat your folks, and how you build teams. So those are the two that come to mind for me.
Yeah, thank you. It's honestly the consumer minds that need to open up for the pricing. It's hard because it's like you want to save money, but at the same time, you want to support sustainable brands and spend the extra dollar for things that are higher quality and will last you a lifetime rather than just break in your hand and then you have to throw it out. But thank you for that. So I'm going to turn it over to Joelle for any misconceptions in her field at all.
Mhm. And first, I do agree with Hope. I think if we come together, we can create a framework for like a better. So if you guys want to do that, I think so. There on two sides. On one on the scholar side, like scholarly side, I kind of always feel like an imposter when I'm presenting and I don't have a PhD as an independent fashion researcher, and they're like, oh, you're affiliated to a store. And I'm like, yeah, but it's much more than just a store. So there's always that kind of like you know, you're like, oh, you are doing you're working in a store, so you don't really understand the theory. And I'm practicing those theory in my store. So, in a way, you're kind of the best person to explain the theories to people, or being a practitioner too. So that's something big, but I learned to deal with that, and now I'm fully conscious of it, and it's fine. I accept it. And then from the retail point of view, sometimes I think that, again, people are just like, well, fashion is just frivolous. I think we discussed that. So why are you talking about fashion with such an intellectual voice? And so it's always kind of, I feel like it's always important to continue to explain to people what is fashion and the importance of understanding the industry, but also the culture and the history of it. So yeah, it's, trying to explain to people that fashion is absolutely not frivolous, that it comes with a lot of things behind, that it has hands, that it has sweat, that it has land, that, it's connected to everything. First, second of all, I mean, without fashion, you cannot, I don't know if anyone who wakes up in the morning and walks around naked. So, that's the first thing you think about in the morning, and the last thing you think about at night, also when you either sleep naked or put on your pajamas. So it's so close to the skin. So yeah, always the idea of also working in retail is, is easy, it's fine, you're dealing with products, you're actually no, you're taking care of little babies that, you're like nurturing. You have a team that you're also taking care of. You have, a space that you're also taking care of. So I think it's a lot of like misconception around I think it goes back to that idea that fashion is superficial and just, a piece of garment that you put on your body, and then yeah.
Yeah, I agree. There's a giant misconception with the fashion industry as a whole. Like, even people altogether don't even believe that there's more than just one career path within fashion. They just believe, oh, you're going to be a cashier, but there's so many more paths and a ton of misconceptions just with that. So thank you for that. And now I'm going to jump over to Kamilah for the same question.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah, a lot of times when people, and when you say, oh yeah, I work in fashion, and they think, oh, okay, that's not, when you talk about climate, you talk about fashion, it's like, okay, you're gonna change the world with fashion. Like, how are you gonna do that? But it is like, people don't realize what happens along the supply chain and how it affects, women's rights and poverty, and it ties to agriculture, because we have to have the textiles, created. So it ties to, oil and gas, but the plastics in our clothing, and, the ocean, and it ties to so many different things. And, people don't necessarily realize. So I do think it's important to educate people on, it's not just a piece of clothing. There's so many things that happen along the way, and so much impact that it has on every industry. The thing that I was thinking of, or that first comes to mind, is really about the whole kind of like perfectionism, like it's a perfect journey. And even I know like for brands that are sustainable or, you know, whatever they want to call it, it's not that the brand is going to be perfectly sustainable. And even a person, you're not going to be perfectly, you know, I'm a sustainable, you know, advocate, and I do everything perfectly. Like, it's not a perfect journey. It's really about learning, and it's about the decisions that you make along the way. For example, there's so many different ways to be sustainable. You don't have to purchase something. You know, you can wear what's in your closet and make a decision to say, hey, I'm not going to buy a new outfit. I'm going to wear what's in my closet. You can wear clothes that are made of great materials that will last you 10 plus years, you know, that are wool, and you can buy things that you actually love that you're not going to throw away and you want to keep forever. Like, I have a Rick Owens jacket that I bought like a long time ago. It's like leather and denim, and I'm like, I don't want to have to give that away, but I would keep that forever. And it's about where, you know, if you're going to buy something that's of that quality, of materials that might biodegrade. Do swap with your friends, you know, learn how to sew, repair the things that you have. Like, there's so many different ways to, you know, start on this journey, and so many different decisions that you can make along the way. And it doesn't have to be a perfect thing. It just has to, you know, you just do it and you try.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I know that tie-dye and acid wash became really big too. So a lot of people are redoing their clothes and keeping it and just remaking it into the newest trends and stuff, so they don't have to get rid of the clothing. So that's smart as well to do. We're gonna turn it over to Monica now with the same question as well.
Yeah, so I think a misconception would be like if you ask a scientist or engineer what industry they work in, I think fashion industry would not be the first thing that comes to mind. But there's actually a lot of science and research happening in the fashion industry around the materials and processes. So like a rough figure, I think in the fashion industry, it's estimated that about 38% of carbon emissions comes from the raw material production, and another 29% comes from the processing steps of those materials. So an exciting area of innovation is how we can effectively use the existing sources of carbon to produce polymers that can be used to replace non-renewable materials, like, for example, polyester. And one example of those materials is polyhydroxyalkanoates, or PHAs, which are an emerging class of bioplastics that are produced using a bacterial fermentation process and can use feedstocks like agricultural waste, methane gas, all sorts of organic materials to be made. And what's so great about them is that they can behave just like polyester. So you can make these into fibers, and they're also able to safely decompose in different environments, like in marine or soil. So and therefore like not contributing to the pollution of microplastics that's already really, you know, bad in the environment. So, and also like in the processing stage, like in consumables, there's a lot of innovation when it comes to pre-treatment, coloration, and finishing steps, like such as natural dyes and microbial pigments, fluorine-free DWR treatments that are often used for these steps in the industry, and also the methods of how these consumables are being applied in more like dry methods versus wet methods. So using like plasma, ultrasonic spray applications. So ultimately, there's definitely a space for scientists and engineers in fashion. So I think it's like super exciting.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just hearing a little glimpse of what you work on is just so interesting. So I'm gonna talk about the last question for you guys that I have, and that is, what does diversity mean to you, and how can we change people's perception of what working in fashion looks like? And I'll start off with Hope again.
Thanks, Madison. Yeah, before I jump into the question, I just wanted to share that I really appreciate Kamilah and Monica and Joelle talking about how fashion's connected to the oil industry. And I just was like, oh, like, and I had learned in a documentary that fashion is the second largest polluter, second to oil. So it's deep that, like, as folks are pushing like in the US for like green jobs and like sustainability and impacting climate change, they're always talking about oil lobbyists. But I was like, are there fashion lobbyists that have just as much of a stake in the oil industry that are like trying to make sure that we don't like actually go green? I was like, this is deep. So I just think appreciate what's being shared today. And I'm sure someone has that knowledge. You could drop it in the chat if you know the answer. But what does diversity mean to me, and how can we change people's perceptions of what working in fashion looks like? So one thing I will bring up around diversity, and it actually came up in some reflection questions I think we had discussed before this panel, is this issue around like internships, and so and paid internships versus non-paid. So diversity means to me is around like making sure that the field is accessible to folks who traditionally have not had access. And that could be various identity categories. It could be folks of color, it could be Black folks, it could be women, it could be folks with disabilities, right? But I think that like if we're really going to address diversity in that industry, especially as we need to pivot the industry so we could be sustainable and save the planet, we really need to think about pathways that are rooted in equity models. So my thought process is that I think we kind of need to do away with the whole unpaid internship thing. And we need to move towards an apprenticeship model, which is, I know Kamilah dropped the apprenticeship word. And the reason why I share that is because if I used to work in tech, and so tech is like notorious, right? For like, how do we get like low income kids into tech? How do we get youth of color in tech and in STEM, right? And science careers. And you have to reframe the model, because unpaid internships are rooted in a meritocracy model, right? This idea that you got to pay your dues and then you can get into the industry, right? And I used to be an unpaid intern, and it was crazy. That's a story for another day. In a different industry entirely, journalism. But like equity model is you pay someone to learn. You pay someone, you do an apprenticeship, you pay them to learn. You pay them to learn how to create the silver, or you pay them to learn how to do the science behind it, or you pay them to learn coding or whatever that we need them to do. And that's really crucial, because I'm sure many of us here have felt the barrier of like, you know, like when you try to apply for a job, they want you to have like 10 years experience or 3 years or whatever, and you're like, but I've never done it before. How am I going to learn if you don't give me a chance? And that's the old way of doing things, and that barrier is like crushes people's lives and dreams. Like I have people in my family who would just like, they just gave up because they're like, well, it's impossible. There's a wall. And so if we create apprenticeships where folks are like, no, like, let's reframe this. Like, no, we're going to actually give you a monthly stipend for 6 months to do this thing, and you can only focus on this. You're going to be able to transition into the career that you like and the passion. And then we're going to benefit from your expertise and your vision, because we're wasting folks' talents out here in this traditional meritocracy. And I'll note that like in the tech world, there is an organization that's been modeling this. My partner was able to take advantage, but they actually pay folks. The organization is called Bitwise. So just give you a real life example. They actually pay folks to learn how to code, adults, right? So not just young people, because young people you can get a lot of funding for young folks to learn in philanthropy, but like adults, for some reason, we have no compassion for adults. We're like, if you haven't learned it already, like you messed up, it's all your fault. That's crazy. So this organization pays folks like $5K a month to learn technology for 6 months, and then gets them into the industry. That's an equity-based model, because they understand that a young person coming from the fields, like who, you know, intergenerationally they're farm workers, they can't get to tech the same way that a traditional white person who has access to wealth can. So just to sort of wrap it up and summarize, we have to reframe the model. And diversity for me is around making sure, like, that's what a commitment to diversity is creating those kind of models. That's the only way we're going to diversify things, is if we think about deeply about centering the folks that are the most marginalized. So paid apprenticeships, you know, we talk about affirmative action, there's also reparations, but we really got to move towards models where we're committed to folks learning and actually getting the skills they need, instead of the other way where it's like you got to pay your dues and you don't know anything and stupid. I don't know. I felt that way in internships a lot. And it's a miracle I even got into some because I was broke. So, all right, I'm done, you guys. Pause there.
True, it's the harsh reality. I know that's every like student's fear is trying to get a career after school because they believe they need experience and internships right away. So it's hard to keep going because you get unmotivated right away. So thank you for that. And now I'm going to turn it over to Joelle with the same question.
Just to go back quickly to what Monica has said, we need scientists and engineers in fashion. Without you, we cannot innovate. And just also to go back to history, rayon and polyester were created by also scientists working in fashion. So back in the time, it was a huge innovation. Today we are complaining about it a little bit, but to create all those new materials, whether it's vegetable leather, vegan leather, or tencel, and all of those new fabric, or biofabricated material, we need you. So I have a lot of things to send you if you want to talk to people about those misconceptions. I think that to be honest, I think that Hope's definition of diversity is quite on point. I think for me, diversity is just the difference within the group, and it's accepting that difference. And if you are evolving with a group that is exactly like you, how are you supposed to learn? And how are you supposed to actually grow? So for me, it doesn't make sense to kind of just be surrounded by people that have the same skill, that people that are from the same background, people that are from the same, that have the same I mean, I learned a lot about that moving to the US also. But the way I am at Tribute is I don't really care what's your background, as long as you want to come and you're interested in working with me and you are respectful and you have values. I'm willing to teach you. I actually do not have anyone working with me that has a background in fashion. I have a librarian working with me because also we decided to develop a little fashion library. So she's doing an amazing job. I have 2 students of sustainability, corporate sustainability, that are working with me, that are actually teaching me how to report and what kind of system we can create in order to grow our company. I'm working with a graphic designer. I'm working with a diplomat, someone who actually studied also international relations, and a lawyer. So I am the only one within the team that has actually a background in fashion. So, and I'm so happy that I'm surrounded by those people and we are learning from each other and we are growing together. And, I'm not interested in hiring someone that comes specifically with a fashion background. So yeah, I think I think it's at the heart of what I do. It's at the heart of who I am also as this multicultural person that is a white Arab African. So I've struggled with that identity all my life, and if I can help and teach people to look at it from a different way and be surrounded by also a wonderful group of young individuals that also are teaching me. Yeah, why not? So.
Thank you. I like how you mentioned the different ages and them educating you too. It's important. I'm going to pass it over to Kamilah with the same exact question.
Yeah, so I agree. I mean, you can't really talk about diversity without adding equity to that conversation. So I'll just add. I think everyone said great things, but I'll add for me. I think that it really has to do with allowing people to come with their full self to the table. and present their full self, whether that's gender, race, ethnicity, whether I'm vegan or whatever that is, being able to come and represent your full self in any situation. And also having that person speak with their own voice versus you speaking for that person or someone else speaking for that person and saying, oh, this person thinks that, like, no, that person's right here. They exist and they can speak for themselves, right? So it's making sure that people are able to bring their full self and they're able to speak for themselves, and their voice matters just as much as anyone else.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Thank you. I'm going to pass it over to Monica now with the same question.
Yeah, and I think to me, diversity means that, people from different backgrounds and different interests can work together to achieve a similar goal. And in this case, it's bringing sustainability to the fashion industry. And working in fashion, it is really diverse because there's so many different teams and organizations that need to work together to achieve this goal. So I think where companies and organizations have the biggest success is when they have sustainability and innovation embedded across the organization. So whether you're working in the marketing, design, engineering, product development team, you're all working together towards that goal. And especially when the organization can really identify the areas where they can make the biggest impact, and coming up with strategies to tackle those impacts. Because if you have your, using maybe better organic cotton, but your company doesn't really use a lot of or cotton in general, then it's not going to make as great as an impact. So I think identifying those areas, making strategic plans to work towards those. And it's really great to see some of these larger brands partnering with a lot of material innovators and doing pilots to really try to scale up the technology, like Bolt Threads and Milo, for example, who make mycelium leather, and starting this consortium with different brands like Adidas, Lululemon, carrying Stella McCartney. So I think it's really interesting to see those kinds of collaborations coming about.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And to bring the price part back into it, Lululemon, it's so expensive, but you need to think about the quality and what they're actually using to make their leggings, which is why it's so pricey and why consumers need to start thinking about that when purchasing items. So thank you for that. And those were all the questions I have for my portion. So I'm going to pass it over to Zoe, but thank you all for answering them. That was awesome. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So we're going to dive right into the advice section and advice/resources you guys might have for the audience. So first question is how do you guys build confidence to share your ideas? Because I know that, like we were saying before, there are some misconceptions in this industry that you guys work, and it seems like you guys all have a lot of confidence. I know, like Kamilah was saying earlier, we all want to have a good voice to share with everyone and feel proud about that. So just wanted to ask how you guys build that confidence.
I guess we'll go in order again. I would say the first thing that comes to mind is you have to get really grounded in who you are and what is it you're about, and your values. I think back to what Kamilah was sharing, and so start there with yourself and your values, who you are, what you want, what direction you're going in, what you believe, the type of impact you want to have on the world. I say is number one, and then number two, find supportive community and mentors and folks who can remind you of that when it gets hard. Especially if you also struggle with mental health, things like me, or PTSD and certain traumas because of our lived experience. So I would say those two things are going to be crucial to keep you grounded. Find those tools and those communities that keep you grounded in who you are.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Zoe. Am I next?
Yes, sorry about that. You're next. I just had a technical difficulty. Absolutely, Hope. I agree. Continue, Joelle.
confidence. I think trial and error, to be honest with you, and I still, fail sometimes. I mean, my little story is that when I started presenting papers, at the end of my presentation, a lot of people would come and tell me, "Oh, I love your accent. Oh my God, da, da, da," and I was like, "Wow, this is what you got from my presentation? Okay." So it's been a bit hard. Like it was a bit hard on me, and when I get stressed, my accent comes back, and I think public speaking, I'm really the worst at it. And after a couple of them, I was just like, okay, well, I'm really tired of having to explain to people why I have an accent, and I hope that they don't really listen to that only. So it was really, for me, it meant that I failed to kind of put my ideas out there if people did not listen to to the content and just how I was saying it. So it's still very hard to talk about confidence, but I agree that people, mentors, like, I go back to my advisors all the time at my program. I rewatch some of the videos, that I when I did my presentation, to learn more about myself and to understand better how can I improve. So again, trials and error, and I still think that I have issues and confidence today, again, especially because English is not my first language, and it's always a bit of difficult for me to be able to express myself fully. But yeah, I think I'm lucky to be surrounded by people that help me to enhance and not being scared again of failing, or of having to tomber, again, English, having to be having to go through errors in order to better understand myself. So yeah, don't be afraid. We all make mistakes, and it's okay, because when you stand up again, and it's better, it cannot be worse than that.
Absolutely. I don't speak another language, but I can definitely understand how that'd be a difficult thing. So that's really awesome. You've overcome the obstacle in a lot of ways. Okay, so Kamilah, you're up.
Yeah, so I like it how we say build confidence, because it is like a muscle, and I do think that everyone's at different levels. So don't think just because you see someone that seems like they're confident, they might not be that confident, but they might just be doing things. I think the biggest thing that you can do is take action toward the thing that you want to do. So for example, for some people, building confidence might be, I'm going to attend this webinar and I'm going to ask a question. And another person might say, oh, I'm going to hold a swap event, and I'm going to invite my friends. Like, whatever that is, take the next step, because I think that the hardest part is like the part before you actually do it, because you're like, oh my gosh, this is not going to work out. Nobody's going to care about what I have to say. And then once you do it, you're like, okay, it wasn't that bad. So it is like a muscle. Like, you just have to start doing whatever that next little step is.
Absolutely. Okay, Monica? Yes.
Yeah, I think how Hope mentioned that building a community and like a mentors and your network is really important for building confidence, because there's definitely going to be things that you just don't know, or you need to do more research on. So it's great to have like people that you can reach out to that can point you to like resources or have some knowledge about it, and can help you understand things. Like even my internship now, like there's times where like I don't know something, so I like will text my old boss and just ask them like questions about like production, and like they'll help me. And so it's like really cool to have that kind of support. And yeah, it really helps me build confidence when I'm contributing to like a lot of these projects that I'm working on.
Absolutely. I really enjoyed all of your guys' responses. It's true. It really is a fundamental part, having that community around you to help support in anything you do really, especially these industries that we work in. So we are running a little late on time for this panel, so I just want to jump right into the audience Q&A so we get some time for the audience to ask you guys questions, because you guys just shared such amazing information about yourselves. So we're going to go straight into that. So if anyone in the audience wants to either just unmute yourself now and ask the question, or you can throw it in the chat and I'll read it out loud to the panelists. We can start that up right now.
Hi, my name's Sarah. First, thank you so much for everything you shared today. It was really inspiring to hear and really educational. So I just graduated college, and I guess the question I would have is, what advice do you have for really taking that first step in entering the sustainable fashion side? Because I've done a lot of internships in luxury fashion and kind of hit a point where I was like, this isn't what I care about. I really care about making more of a difference. But I'm sort of having a hard time initially getting into the field. So any advice or insights you could share to that?
I would say network, network. Find even the local organizations that are involved, or talk to people that own boutiques or wherever else, and introduce yourself to people. Don't be afraid to reach out to people on LinkedIn. Join different communities, of course, like Fashion Revolution, and also Remake. I mean, there's a community of people. You just kind of have to find those people and insert yourself and connect with those people. And then you'll start to see some of those opportunities, pop up.
Awesome. So I see that there is a question from Erica. What would each of you say is the biggest threat to sustainable fashion right now? And any of you can answer. Feel free to unmute yourself.
I don't think it's too much of I would say it's a threat, but it's more like a big challenge is when companies right now are really trying to scale up innovation. So you have this proof of concept and trying to partner with big brands to be able to scale up that technology, and all the different technical issues that come from going from a pilot stage to manufacturing thousands of yards of material. So I think one of the biggest challenges is all these innovation material companies trying to scale up the innovation, and the time and effort and all the key players involved that have to work together to make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so, oops, sorry. I thought that was a question, but it's actually just Hope. Yeah, so if anyone else has any questions and wants to ask really quickly before our panel ends today, please feel free. You can also keep typing in the chat as well.
I just wanted to add on what Monica was saying, that all those misconceptions that we talked about earlier are kind of the biggest threat to our field and to the work that we're doing. In general, it's you don't even need to go, think about fast fashion as, I don't think we're going to solve that issue, but it's also the way you understand fashion. And I think it's very important that you understand what is fashion and how important that industry is and how big that industry is, and not just take it for granted or look at it from this just the catwalk and the runway point of view.
I would also add and maybe this is also a misconception, is that I think one of the biggest dangers to sustainable fashion is a lot of the political conversations and lack of political will around global warming, and making sure that we're actually creating practices and moving away from fossil fuels. And so if fashion is reliant on fossil fuels, then we are in another pickle. And so those folks that are lobbying on behalf of fossil fuels are a huge threat to sustainable fashion. So I think we also need to expand, what Joelle's saying, is how we're thinking about it, and understanding that even these pundits and these people debating and the politics, it's actually all interconnected. And so if we could come at it from that framework, we probably would be it's like that, yeah, it would be more intersectional, and maybe we'd be able to get what we need faster. Well, hopefully. We have a lot of work to do, you guys.
Yeah, and that's why we need scientists. That's why we need so many. It's not one, the industry cannot survive alone. It's not possible. And something we did not touch upon is packaging. Packaging is a huge threat also to sustainable fashion, because it's, I mean, when I receive the sometimes some of the packages that, you know, are shipped, whether it's from LA or even New York, and sometimes I'm just like, guys, just look at what you're putting inside of those bags. You don't need bubble wrap around a t-shirt that is in cotton. I don't think the t-shirt will fall apart, hopefully not. So, you know, that idea of also look at the way you consume your packages, or like what you do with your packaging after you open a package. Right? That's also important.
So true. It's such an interdisciplinary, industry and field. So we have time for one more question. If someone is wanting to ask a question before we get into shouting out the panelists' social medias and everything, please feel free to ask it. If not, we can go straight into that as well.
I have a question. So how do you feel your culture has contributed to your passions for wanting to make that change in the fashion industry, and having that need to want to do something about it, or being represented in what you're wearing, as you've mentioned today? I hope that makes sense.
For me, it's everything, personally. But again, I struggle with my cultures. But yeah, I'm wearing African wax and the Kori, but I wear like, it's the way I express myself is also the way I understand also who I am, and I want people to understand who I am. Same with my work, it's exactly the same thing. I try to understand better, you know, the fashion, the impacts of certain areas, the impact of fashion in certain areas on the West, specifically like West Africa, like the Middle East, and try to make people understand that it doesn't come from here, it comes actually initially from there. But we don't study that in the history of fashion. We study Western fashion mainly. So I think for me, it's everything. That's where actually I am mostly interested in fashion, because of the cultural aspect of it and the historical aspect of it. So.
Yeah, and not only, if I understood your question right, well, Ivan, I heard that there's like a question also of like how you bring in your culture into the work, and I think first, like, getting grounded in who you are and what it is you want to bring, but like figuring out like how and what opportunities and folks are doing similar work in the industry, but also figuring out if it's something that you have to just like start yourself, or find other folks that are also entrepreneurs that are starting things, would be like my offering. And that you also can't separate who you are from the work anyways. So like if you enter environments where folks are trying to do that to you, it's like, nah, like this isn't gonna work. Like, like I think sometimes folks are like, I don't know, traditional environments can be work environments, their companies can be like we don't talk about that here, or like, I don't know, they try to like compartmentalize piece of our identities, but it's like, no, like this is who I am. I come as a whole person. I come from this background. This is my story. This is my culture. This is what I wear. And I think as long as you stay grounded in that and search for that in like what, either who you work with, company, entrepreneur, community, whatever, like I think you'll find the alignment like you're looking for and the inspiration.
Awesome. Thank you so much, you guys. So we're going to go into sharing all these wonderful panelists' social medias. So if anyone is interested in like reaching out to them, looking more into their lives and what they're up to, we have the slide that will show their different handles you'll see right in front of you. So yeah, take a look at that. Feel free to take a screenshot, write those down. Yeah, thank you so much. So we also have some upcoming events. So Hope is having an upcoming event, an event for the culture, Black Women's Holiday Marketplace. That's very exciting. Hope, if you want to talk like really briefly about that, kind of give people a little bit of insight on what that is. And then next, Joelle, if you want to talk about yours as well.
Yeah, so every year we usually host some sort of like Black Women's Holiday Market or like guide or different events. So if you just follow at FTC Market or at Just Be Oak or at For the Culture, or sorry, at FTD Collective, then you should be able to sort of like stay connected to, or I think our website, you can download our last year's guide, holiday guide. This year it's probably going to be pretty small, like a guide or something. We're kind of taking a pause transition year, but definitely next year, keep an eye out for the marketplace.
Awesome. Joelle, if you want to speak a little bit about Tribute Collective and DC Sustainable for Fashion Collective, excuse me.
Sure. So, I mean, if you're around, we always organize little pop-ups and with friends. And this Diabla is a cooperative of Bolivian women. One of them is based in DC, and she goes back and forth, and they're going to be here for just like 2 weeks. So we decided to kind of do something with them, and it's going to be fun because they're going to bring their tradition, and they're going to do some kind of prayer around at the door before that. So I'm excited about that. With the DC Sustainable Fashion Collective, in collaboration with the Textile Museum at GW in Washington, we organize every year. We organize a conference. Obviously last year we didn't do it, so we're coming back this fall, but on a smaller format, because we also lost 2 co-founders and both of us are quite busy. But we decided to look at actually sustainability from a much more of a diversity point of view, and in this case we're gonna show that wonderful documentary. If you haven't, you should watch it, and probably the director will be among us here, and we're gonna have a panel talk. This is happening on October 1st in Washington DC, and just go to the website and the information will be out soon. Thank you.
Great. All of that sounds so exciting, Hope and Joelle. That's amazing. I'm really looking forward to that for you guys. So we've finally reached the end of the panel. I want to sincerely thank all of the panelists for coming out. And I know that like Joelle's in a different time zone, so I know it's a bit later for you, and not too much, but I still really appreciate, you guys' flexibility and for sharing this super valuable insight with everyone. I know we all really appreciate that. So our second panel event will be the Fashion Career Development next Saturday on July 31st at 1 a.m. PDT. And you can register at the Eventbrite link that we will put in the chat shortly. But again, thank you guys all so much. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you for having us, and nice to meet you all. Hope we stay in contact.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.